I think NATO is better with a strong U.S. and a strong Europe. It shouldn't be either or. The U.S. has been calling for a stronger Europe for decades. Maybe we're finally getting one, and that should be a good thing. And I don't think it's a threat to NATO or weakens NATO in any way.
Welcome to the Times at One on Times Radio with me, Josh Glancy, Associate Editor of The Sunday Times. As world leaders gather in Ankara for today's NATO summit, the future of the Western alliance has rarely looked more fragile. Is NATO actually still fit for purpose? And can Britain sustain its leading role in the organisation without spending a lot more money on defence? These are the vexing questions facing our Prime Minister. And in 2 weeks, that Prime Minister is almost certain to be a new Andy Burnham. Burnham has said that he wants to have a more domestic focus than Starmer. He wants to spend his time on passing what he calls the Makerfield test, dealing with the kinds of issues that really matter to people in Orrell or Bickershaw. Will that actually work, though? Recent Prime Ministers have expressed astonishment at just how much of their time is spent on foreign affairs. Rishi Sunak estimated that around 40% of his week was devoted to everything from terrorist threats to arming Ukraine. For Starmer, given the chaos unleashed by Donald Trump's return to the White House, this has probably been even higher. The distinction between foreign and domestic is increasingly blurred. Israel's war in Gaza, for example, had massive ramifications for domestic politics. America's war in Ukraine and Russia's attack on Ukraine and America's war in Iran both had a huge impact on inflation and the cost of living. And Trump will be in office for another 2.5 years, which means we have literally no idea what wild new scenarios may unfold. So what should Andy Burnham's approach be? He does have plenty of experience in government. He's run a city. But he would be the first to admit that foreign affairs is not his expertise. Sunak alleviated this burden by appointing David Cameron as a powerful foreign secretary. So could Burnham do something similar with David Miliband? Ultimately, though, there are a whole host of consequential diplomatic and security decisions that can only be made by the Prime Minister. Only the Prime Minister can attend NATO summits. Only the Prime Minister can build the kinds of personal relationships with Emmanuel Macron, Giorgia Meloni and, of course, Trump that will allow him to represent British interests and cut those deals at the highest level. So Burnham may want to block out the world and focus on Britain, but the reality of the situation we face is that the successor to Never Hear Care could very easily become Air Miles Andy. This is the Times at One on Times Radio with me, Josh Glancy. So let's start with that NATO summit today. Keir Starmer is on his way to Ankara, as is President Trump, and NATO allies are expecting some heavy pressure from the US over defence spending. Ben Judah is a former senior advisor to the Foreign Secretary and also a visiting fellow at Chatham House, and he joins us now. Good afternoon, Ben. How are you?
Hello. Good to see you.
Great to see you too. So Andy Burnham says he wants to be a domestic Prime Minister and focus on making the UK strong again. Is that realistic?
Well, I don't think it's realistic as Prime Minister not to spend less than 30% of your time on foreign affairs, because there are so many life or death decisions that only a Prime Minister can take, and that's concerning intelligence operations or all kinds of matters that are crucial in the West's support for Ukraine, and just how high stakes a lot of what the nature of our support is. Now, could you reduce it slightly from half your time to 40% of your time? Well, that depends if you're prepared to make a couple of big political decisions, such as, are you going to have a deputy prime minister that can stand in for you on the international circuit and who can stand in for you when foreign leaders from sort of middling countries are visiting London? Are you going to make that deputy prime minister role a real representational role? Are you going to be prepared to go, you know what, this G20 summit's maybe not that important, the deputy prime minister is going, and that means making that person more important? Are you going to be prepared to empower a foreign secretary to have somebody that's there for a while and that is explicitly chairing a lot of committees where international decisions are taking place, such as the National Security Council? And that means having somebody that's seen as a big shot and a heavyweight by our international partners. Because if you have a lightweight in that job, well, you'll suddenly find that the Americans don't want to talk to them, the Gulfies don't want to talk to them, and the Europeans are just knocking on Downing Street's door going, sorry, we just want to talk to the person who's in charge here.
I mean, one difference, I think, between Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham is that Starmer really likes the world stage. He liked the grandeur of it. He liked the seriousness of it. And I think he felt elevated when he was there. He liked to be the statesman. Now, maybe every Prime Minister ends up liking that, but I do get the impression Andy Burnham it doesn't find that stuff as alluring. And you talked about empowering others around him. He has talked about this collaborative, he calls it a sort of Manchesterist approach. Maybe that's just verbiage, but it does strike me that he might be someone who's a bit more willing to let others take the world stage and won't be as excited to hang out with Macron and Merz as Starmer perhaps was.
I think that he can, if he goes for a government of all the talents, heavyweight foreign secretary, heavyweight deputy prime minister, heavyweight chancellor, who are taking on a lot of that international side of things, then I think he can focus more on domestic politics. I think that Keir Starmer made a mistake in thinking that the international stage was doing more for him politically at home than it actually was. The truth is that when you're on these visits or when you're enjoying these sort of the world stage, it can sort of trick you a little bit into thinking that what you're doing is a little bit more significant and important to viewers, readers and listeners at home than it actually is. But Burnham's got a couple of big decisions he's going to have to make about how he handles a few things that he can't sort of delegate. First one is that next year we're going to be hosting the G20. Whether he likes it or not, Burnham will be chairing the world's 20 most important leaders coming to London, and he needs to make that a success. There'll be a media circus around it, and all discussion will be, is Trump going to come? Is Xi Jinping going to come? Do we have important leaders like MBS from Saudi Arabia? And then the year after that, we're hosting the G7. And you will have noticed Emmanuel Macron, who's normally sort of a loud voice, sharing his views on the world stage and not frightened to criticise the Americans. It's been very quiet in the last 6-7 months. And that's because he just hosted the G7. It's so important in your domestic politics that it looks like a success.
And obviously, Starmer is having his last hurrah in Ankara this week. What are you expecting to see from that summit? Do you think we are going to get really singled out and slapped down by the US and by Trump, or do you think actually it'll be an equal opportunities haranguing for the Europeans in Ankara?
Well, Rubio has been speaking to kind of European foreign ministers and saying that, look, there is a chance this summit could go really badly because Trump is so angry about a lack of European support for his military misadventure in Iran. So that is something to be concerned about. I think it's a low-end probability, but it's still a possibility that things could go really badly. Now, I think we can expect the US president to try and mock and humiliate the prime minister to some degree because, sadly, he's a loser politically, and Trump enjoys picking on the weak and underlining people's failure. And yes, the UK has not been as supportive as he expected it to be, and potentially it could have been in the war that just took place in Iran, even though I think that the Prime Minister took the right decision.
Yeah, and he may also still be stinging from that absolute hammering that the US got last night in the World Cup, despite his best efforts. Thank you very much for joining us. That was Ben Judah, visiting fellow at Chatham House. And if you were watching on YouTube, he was in a very jazzy pink shirt, which I appreciated at least. So thank you, Ben. Another person who knows NATO really, really well is Kurt Volker, the US diplomat. He's the former US ambassador to NATO, and he was also special representative for the US in Ukraine. He joins us now. It's morning for you there, Kurt, so good morning.
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Very well. Thank you for joining us. So, look,
it's a pleasure.
We are expecting some fairly heavy criticism from your president in Ankara this week. Is he right? Is he right to be telling off the Europeans for not spending more on defence? Certainly defence spending is rising, maybe not that quickly. Do you think he's got a point?
Well, I do think he has a point, and he's not the first one to make this point. It was the UK that hosted the Wales summit in 2014, where allies committed to spend 2% of GDP on defense, only 2%. And by the time Trump took office in 2017, only 3 countries were doing it. The threats have gotten a lot worse. Russia has launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Everyone is having to try to help Ukraine fend that off and then establish itself. We have growing threats from China. We have a war in the Middle East. And last year, everybody agreed to spend 5% of GDP on defense, and only a handful of NATO countries are. So the trend may be moving in the right direction, but it's got to move a lot faster.
Do you think that Trump's particular and rather idiosyncratic approach to all of this works? You know, it can sometimes be quite insulting the way he talks to his allies. It can be demeaning. It can be patronising and undermining. Not always, but sometimes. I mean, the argument is, well, what he needs to provoke them and really, rile them up and get them to believe that actually America would and can walk away from the transatlantic alliance. Do you think it works? Do you think it's sometimes counterproductive?
It's both. I think it does work, and I think it's counterproductive. On the practical side, I think it is making the point much more strongly, much more harshly, also in a very public way. And a lot of European countries are reacting to that. Germany, for example, has really put a lot more money into defense, and I think Trump's style has been a part of that. But on the other hand, one of the strengths of NATO, perhaps the most important strength, is the idea that there is some kind of transatlantic unity, that the free countries of the world are banded together in order to promote a common vision of freedom, democracy, security in the world. And that unity is really shattered with Trump as president and needs to be rebuilt. So it's both. You're getting better results, but at the same time, you're getting that kind of disunity and frictions within the alliance.
And Trump has threatened, for example, talking of disunity, to cut US forces in Europe by a third. Do you think that is likely to happen? And what would the ramifications of that be?
Yeah. Well, first off, let's remember the context. We are at a relatively historic high for post-Cold War forces in Europe. They were much lower during President Obama's period and President Trump's first term, and then they've been ramped up as we were facing Russia's invasion. And I think Trump and the U.S. military are right to say that we do want to rebalance this again because we have other threats around the world that we have to deal with. And as Europe does spend more and beef up capabilities, we should be able to do that. Now, what happens here is Trump makes this very political, throws around numbers like 1/3 or 5,000 troops here, 5,000 troops there, and it can make it sound like a penalty, like I didn't like something that somebody said, and so I'm going to take troops out of their country. But that's not the real world. That's not the way this is actually done. It would be very expensive if we were to jerk military forces around that way. Instead, it's the U.S. military that does a proper force planning exercise that looks at the missions required, the force mixture required for those missions, and then the best locations for those. And this is something that's constantly reviewed over time.
And Kurt, I was thinking back the other day to 2019, and President Macron called NATO brain dead. I think he was talking to The Economist at the time. And it was a hugely controversial statement at the time. It now looks a bit prescient. I mean, is NATO still fit for purpose? I mean, when you look ahead, I mean, could we see a more European NATO emerge where America doesn't play such a leading role, or is that for the birds? I mean, do you think the future of the organisation you worked for so long with is actually realistic?
I think that NATO is actually doing very well and has a long future ahead. The purpose of NATO is to prevent attacks on NATO member states because we are so capable that we deter those attacks. And that has been going on very well for 75 years, and I think is going to continue. Second, I think NATO is better with a strong U.S. and a strong Europe. It shouldn't be either or. The U.S. has been calling for a stronger Europe for decades. Maybe we're finally getting one, and that should be a good thing. And I don't think it's a threat to NATO or weakens NATO in any way. As for the U.S., we are, again, at a relative historic high for how much the U.S. is dominating NATO in terms of our level of national defense spending versus NATO, in terms of the troop deployments and so forth. There should be some rebalancing, but I again view that that's the direction we should go in.
Okay, so we shouldn't panic, is the message I'm getting. I mean, you talk about...
Keep calm and carry on. Right?
Keep calm and carry on. I mean, you talk about the European defence and how Europe needs to strengthen itself. I mean, it strikes me that the strongest thing Europe has going for it at the moment is Ukraine, really, and the extraordinary advances they've made in drone technology and how to fight the modern warfare using robotics and all sorts of things. I mean, will Ukraine end up leading the European defence architecture?
In many ways, they already are, because they have developed the defense industry of the future, the drone and counter-drone, electronic warfare, and air defense mixture that everybody's going to need. They have the largest, most battle-hardened, best-trained military in Europe. They've gotten equipment from everywhere. They've mastered interoperability, and they will be one of the most capable military powers in Europe going forward. That's a great thing and good for Europe. Europe will be providing security guarantees for NATO to deter future Russian attacks. The U.S. may take part in that as well. So far, NATO membership is off the table, but I think that should change. I think we want to see an end to the war, and we want to see that normalization. But then we also want to see Ukraine embedded within NATO. There's no reason to have a separate regime for Ukraine.
My final question for you, Kurt, is that people over here are still very exercised about Donald Trump's intervention in the World Cup, getting the red card revoked. I mean, there's calls that Gianni Infantino, the head of FIFA, needs to step down. I mean, what's your take on this geopolitical furor?
Well, first off, I imagine those same people are taking a lot of satisfaction in Belgium's victory. Won last night. So maybe that will calm the waters a little bit. Yes, I would prefer to see politicians do politics and sportsmen do sports, but sometimes we do see some mixture in there. And in this case, the head of FIFA has a very difficult job right now, and if he gets through this and we have a successful World Cup, crowning the best team possible, I think everyone should just be happy and move on.
By the best team possible, I assume you meant the mighty Three Lions of England. But thank you very much for joining us. That was Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO.